Or if you got a dial tone and you dialed a number, the word you heard more often than hello was wrong number, because the connections got you into somebody else's number. Sometimes you could pick up the phone and stumble on somebody else's conversation that was already going on, unintentionally. It was, we even had a technical term for it. It was called a cross connection. These were connections that made us very cross. I'm sorry, your translators will not be able to get that. Anyway, then if you wanted to call from one city to another, let us say from Calcutta, where I went to high school, to Delhi, where I later went to college, if you wanted to make a phone call, you had to book in the morning something called a trunk call, and then sit by the phone the whole day waiting for that to come through. Or, if you were really wealthy and it was important, you could pay 8 times the going rate for something called a lightning call. But in those days, even lightning struck slowly in India, so it took about half an hour for a lightning call to come through. That was the condition of telephones in India in 1975, and even later, because in 1984, I remember a member of parliament stood up to protest the woeful services, the terrible conditions of our telephone communications in parliament. And our then communications minister replied in a lordly manner that telephones are a luxury in a developing country, not a right, that the government had no obligation to provide better service, and that if the honourable member was not satisfied with his telephone, could he please return it, since there was an 8-year-long waiting list for telephones in our country. That was the situation. In fact, well into the 80s, telephones were considered such a privilege that elected members of parliament had the right to allocate 15 telephone connections to whomever they deemed worthy. That was the kind of situation we were in. Now you fast forward to the 21st century. When I wrote this book, The Elephant, the Tiger, and the Cell Phone in 2007, I was able to report in it that in April 2007, India had just set a new world record by selling, at that point, 7 million cell phones. And those, in that day, were the largest number of telephone connections made in 1 month anywhere in the world, including the US and China, in the history of telecommunications. So I wrote very proudly that India had set a new world record in April. Well, my book was finished, sent to the publishers, printed, bound, and reached the bookstores in December of 2007, and by that time that figure was already out of date, because by December India was already selling over 8 million cell phones a month. The book continues to sell, I'm proud to say, but the record keeps falling. Next month it became 9 million, a few months later 10 million. The most recent figure, for a month and a half ago, is that India is selling 15 million cell phones a month. A month. Which means in 1 month we are selling more than 7 times the number of phone connections that the entire country had when I left to go to study in the United States. Today, India has overtaken the United States to become the world's 2nd largest telephone market. China is still the largest, but we are growing faster. And what is more significant, though, when I spoke about the elephant, the tiger, and the cell phone, is not just the numbers. The numbers are phenomenal. I think at the end of last year, we have 509 million telephone connections in our country. It's a mind-boggling figure, and there will be more. But what is more interesting is who is carrying these cell phones. Because if you visit my country, you will still see a lot of poverty, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But if you go, for example, to Delhi, the capital, and you go to the suburbs of the city, and on the side streets, you will find a man called an istriwala. An istriwala has a wooden cart that looks like it was made in the 16th century. On it rests a coal-fired steam iron that looks like it was made in the 18th century. But in his pocket he is carrying a 21st century instrument, a cell phone. Because not only is the cell phone cheap and affordable, but in most Indian plans incoming calls are free. So it doesn't cost him anything to receive calls from all the neighborhood telling him that he should come to this apartment to pick up a shirt or a sari or a suit to iron. That is the job of the istriwala. So this poor man who is earning a few rupees a day for ironing shirts, he has a cell phone. or if you are being driven. In fact, if you go to India, don't try and rent a car without a driver. India is one of those countries where it is actually cheaper to rent a car with a driver than without a driver, because the car companies know well that if you haven't learned your driving in India, their car is not safe in your hands. So, you know that. But you will find that your driver is carrying a cell phone, not one given by the company. He can afford it because our rates are so low. In the United States, the average cell phone bill every month is $65. I'm sure some of you are paying more than that. In India, the average cell phone bill a month is $4, because we have the cheapest per call, per unit rates in the world. So even the relatively poor people can afford a phone. I was in Kerala, my home state, not long ago. Mr. Jayanar is here in Trivandrum, where you also come from. And I was visiting the country farm of a friend of mine. This was about 20 kilometers outside the city, far away from the urban areas. It was a hot day, so my friend said, you know, there are lots of coconut palm trees everywhere. So he said, how would you like some fresh coconut water? And I said, of course, as you all know, the best, most nutritious and refreshing thing to drink on a hot day is coconut water. So I said, yes. So he pulled out a cell phone, dialed the number, and a voice said, I'm up here. And we looked, and right on top of the nearest coconut tree, with his sarong tied around his knees, a hatchet in one hand and a cell phone in the other, was the local toddy tapper, who proceeded to bring down the coconuts for us to drink. This is what is happening today. Fishermen in my home state are taking cell phones out to sea, and after they catch their fish, they are calling each of the market towns on the coast to find out where their fish, the particular fish they have caught, will fetch the best price. So they are being empowered by the cell phones. Farmers, in the old days, you farmed and did your harvesting. What did you do? Either you went or you sent an able-bodied young male relative, sometimes an 8-year-old boy, on perhaps a 6, 7, 10-kilometer walk to the nearest market town to find out how things were in the town that day. Is the market open? What price will my produce fetch? Then that poor boy will walk all the way back. You will then load your cart with all your whatever you've harvested. You will go all the way back to the market and sell it. Half a day's back-breaking labor, which is now saved by 1 2-minute phone call. So the reason I mention this cell phone as a symbol is it has become a significant instrument for the empowerment of the Indian poor, the Indian underclass. So when I speak of the transformation of India, it is, yes, a transformation powered by technology, but it is a transformation in the lives of the majority of our people that really matters. I'm very pleased to be here at FUNGLODE, which is, after all, a foundation focusing on development and democracy. And these are the two instruments in my country that are fundamental to understanding India and to thinking about the future of India. Because we are a developing country. We have 1.2 billion people, but that means we have 260 million people in our country who still live below the poverty line. And this is a poverty line not like the UN World Bank poverty line of $1.25 a day. This is an Indian poverty line calculated in rupees according to Indian realities, and calculated differently in the cities and in the rural areas. And in rural India, the poverty line is at 360 rupees a month, which is just 12 US cents a day. So there are people in my country who live with less than 12 US cents a day. That is the big challenge for any Indian government. It is to try and bring the benefits of development to people who have nothing, where the poverty line has been drawn barely this side of the funeral pyre. And for us, therefore, it becomes very important that we use science and technology and modern progress and industry and trade for the purpose of bringing prosperity to our country, so that we can pull every Indian out of these miserable conditions of life that some of them live in, give them the opportunity for 2 square meals a day, a roof over their heads to protect them from the wind and the rain and the sun, the opportunity of a decent education for their children, and above all, of course, at the end of it, an economy in which